The sage lunatics might be running the asylum. Yep, Christopher Whitty, Patrick Vallance, Neil Ferguson and that commie Susan Mickey, I'm looking at you. But finally, there is genuine resistance that must ensure Boris Johnson follows through on his promise to live with COVID-19 once and for all by delivering Brits an irreversible roadmap out of the pandemic. Last week, 100 brave Tory backbench rebels stood up for what's right by refusing to nod through further restrictions on our civil liberties and freedoms. But on Saturday night came the bombshell. As I have been pleading for some weeks, finally a Tory big beast, Boris Johnson's Brexit hero, Lord Frost, quit cabinet, saying enough was enough. In a polite but politically significant resignation letter, he told the Prime Minister, "We also need to learn to live with COVID, and I know that is your instinct too. You took a brave decision in July against considerable opposition to open up the country again. Sadly, it did not prove to be irreversible, as I wished, and believe you did too. I hope we can get back on track soon and not be tempted by the kind of coercive measures we have seen elsewhere." Now, as sage hysterics and cabinet irrationals like Michael Gove and Sajid Javid start the drumbeat towards a full lockdown, possibly on December the 27th, it's time for others to stand up and be counted when it matters. Vallance and Whitty have told ministers new measures are needed now. It could see restrictions on mixing indoors, dreaded social distancing measures reintroduced, holidays banned, and the hospitality industry forced communist style to only serve food or drink outdoors in the middle of winter. The irony is if the cabinet do agree to introduce such damaging restrictions, we know these are laws they don't believe in personally, given they didn't even follow them themselves as early as May 2020 and last Christmas, when hospitalisations and deaths were high because no vaccine had yet been rolled out. That's why further restrictions that are essentially lockdowns by stealth must be a red line for every single freedom fighter within the cabinet. I'm looking at you, Rishi Sunak. I'm looking at you, Liz Truss. I'm looking at you, Grant Shapps, too. History will not judge you kindly if you blindly go along with these freedom-destroying and totally unnecessary measures to protect your careers. Meanwhile, the many millions who, for some reason, usually out of a lifelong habit, still choose to get their news from the BBC, are presented with an avalanche of doomsday warnings from public health socialists who seem to want perpetual lockdowns.
Boris Johnson faces calls to bring in tighter COVID restrictions in England over Christmas.
For days, there's been a growing sense around here that more restrictions for England are inevitable.
We're not going to put in place any further measures yet, but be on standby because that could change.
New COVID restrictions in England are not being ruled out before Christmas.
It really highlights the urgency and the fear still swirling around Omicron, the uncertainties about things like the transmissibility and the potential to evade people's immunity.
And now we know why the BBC covers this story with such ferocity. A BBC journalist for, quote, many years who has worked there throughout the COVID era has written a damning anonymous expose for The Spectator magazine, revealing why the corporation's coverage of the pandemic has been a one-sided, dismal failure. This person wrote, "Colleagues I respected and who held sway over running orders to come to the belief that lockdown, social distancing and face coverings, the whole gamut of coronavirus measures, were the only viable route out of the crisis. Alternative strategies, even those backed by eminent scientists and medics, were dismissed as dangerous or the work of cranks, without any effort being made to properly examine their ideas. All the horrors of lockdown, the enforced isolation of older people, funerals without mourners, the dying being denied a relative's hand to hold in their final hours, were blamed directly on the coronavirus rather than the rules, and characterised as tragic but unavoidable consequences of an essential national sacrifice. Then there were the daily death figures reported as within 28 days of a positive test, but with little context. When daily deaths began to fall, positive test results would be reported instead." And this is the key quote. "As the public service broadcaster in a democratic country, the BBC should understand and feature this debate and not act as a government campaigner. Instead, with its reporting of the pandemic, it has made a truly awful new normal much more likely." Shame on them. The BBC Scare Factory pumps this stuff out hour after hour, day after day, week after week, just like they have for the past 21 months. There's never any context, by the way. So tonight, I'll give you some. On December the 16th, just a few days ago, 1.6 million tests were conducted in the UK. Do you know, and I bet you don't, that's 4 times the 364,388 tests conducted on the same date a year ago. No wonder the reported cases are higher. Co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, the eminent Oxford professor Sunitra Gupta, is one of those condemned by the BBC throughout the pandemic. She says of the new scariant, the idea that Omicron is spreading more quickly than other viruses is quite flawed. I am still convinced that we have completely underestimated how other variants spread. The rate which it is now spreading is completely commensurate with there having been a loss of immunity against reinfection among those previously naturally infected and certainly among those who were vaccinated. And Professor Gupta, who you won't hear given a fair shot on the BBC, will be here later. Our country is facing severe consequences if Boris ignores scientists like Professor Gupta and gives in yet again to the brothers Grimm, Vallance, Whitty and Ferguson. The time has come for more cabinet ministers who understand the long-term peril we are now in to follow Lord Frost out the door and prove to the Prime Minister he cannot consistently give away our freedoms without serious consequences.